The Invisible Man, a Manhattan cover story, Chapter 1. The Bergdorf reflection. The air on Fifth Avenue always smelled like a cocktail of expensive perfume, bus exhaust, and high expectations. I walked with the calculated stride of a woman who had somewhere very important to be, even though I was just circling the block of my own anxiety. My heels struck the pavement with the precision of a metronome, steady, unforgiving, each step a measure in an argument I'd already lost but refused to concede. To my right, the windows of Bergdorf Goodman were curated altars of denial. They sold the ultimate Manhattan fantasy at retail prices. Life is a series of perfectly lit, high-gloss moments. Women floated past me in coats that whispered of trust funds and faces that suggested a dermatologist on a permanent retainer. In this city, you aren't just a person. You're a composite of who you know, what you're wearing, and most crucially the status of the person standing 6 inches to your left. Manhattan didn't just tolerate the facade, it perfected it. We polish our gargoyles and perform our greatness while ignoring the steam rising from the cracks in the sidewalk. I stopped mid-stride, catching my reflection. I looked exactly like a woman who had it all figured out. It was the most convincing lie I'd told all week. My phone buzzed. Big I didn't answer. I couldn't, because if I heard his voice, I'd have to acknowledge the noun he'd used the night before. And in New York, the wrong noun can be a death sentence. Chapter 2. The Social Violence of Friend. The gallery the night before had been an exercise in minimalist ego. Stark white walls, track lighting that made everyone look slightly jaundiced, and art that existed primarily to make the donors feel more intellectual than their tax returns. Big stood beside me, looking like the man in a Scotch ad. He didn't just occupy space, he owned the atmosphere around him. I watched him work the room present, charming, yet faintly elsewhere. Standing next to him always felt like barring legitimacy. It was a high-status high. Then she appeared, Alicia. She had the kind of confidence that only comes from being born into a zip code that doesn't require an explanation. Her suit costs more than my first 3 years of rent, and she smiled like she'd already decided she belonged everywhere she stood. "John, you made it," she said, her voice a polished blade of familiarity. Big didn't miss a beat. He gave her that effortless, devastating crinkle around his eyes. Of course, I waited. I straightened my posture. I prepared my writer in the city smile. I waited for the bridge, the connection that would tether me to his world in front of this woman. Big turned back to her, casual, unbothered. "Alicia, this is Carrie, a friend." Friend, the word didn't just land, it cratered. It was the social equivalent of being marked down for clearance at Century 21. I smiled, because that's what you do when you're demoted in public. I extended my hand, already feeling the invisible ink fading on my skin. "Nice to meet you," I said, hearing my voice float a half-inch above the actual moment. Alicia nodded politely, her eyes already scanning the room for someone with a better title. Big stayed another 15 minutes, just long enough to be polite. Then he leaned in, his breath warm against my ear. "I've got an early morning. Don't wait up." He left. He didn't ask if I wanted a cab. He didn't ask if I was okay. He simply exited the stage, leaving me standing there with a glass of warm champagne, and the realization that I had been introduced exactly as he intended me to be remembered. Chapter 3. The Gothic Horror of Park Avenue. While I was obsessing over a noun, Charlotte York was drowning in a pronoun we. The MacDougal apartment was a masterpiece of beige and cream space designed for looking, not for being. It was a museum of correct choices. Charlotte moved through the foyer with practiced precision, her mind a checklist of domestic perfection. They were sending out thank-you notes for a dinner party that had been a triumph of optics. The paper was heavy, cream-colored, engraved. The envelopes were lined in silk. Everything had to match. But as Charlotte reached the final stack, she realized the stamps were missing. Not just any stamps, the vintage botanicals she'd curated specifically for this aesthetic. Trey, she'd call silence. Trey was at the hospital, or at the club, or simply in that quiet, unreachable place he inhabited even when he was sitting right next to her. She began to search. She opened drawers in the kitchen, trays in the hallway, decorative boxers on the console. Everything was in its place, and yet everything felt wrong. The apartment was too quiet. It felt like a stage set after the actors had gone home. In Trey's study, the air changed. The furniture was darker, the leather heavier. This was his world, his rules. She noticed it then, a small, brass key taped beneath a silver tray on his desk. It was hidden in plain sight, a casual piece of neglect that felt, to Charlotte, like a scream. Her fingers trembled as she peeled it off. She unlocked the bottom drawer. Inside was a leather portfolio, worn at the edges, in a way that suggested it was handled often, but never when the lights were up. When Charlotte lifted the cover, the weight of 15 years pressed into her lungs. Letters, handwritten, dozens of them, bundled neatly by year, tied with a ribbon that had lost its luster. They weren't from a woman. There was no perfume, no looping femininity. The handwriting was restrained, masculine, intimate in its lack of flourish. Each letter was signed with a single, elegant initial, J. Charlotte read one paragraph and felt the room tilt. It wasn't explicit. It was worse. It was affectionate. It was a life lived in the margins of a public performance. I saw the announcement in the Times. Trey, she looks exactly like the woman you described. I hope the facade is comfortable. Right back when the lights are off. Then she found the card. The Meridian Athletic Club, West Village. Charlotte stared at it. Understanding didn't arrive in a rush. It arrived in a slow, devastating clarity. She closed the portfolio carefully, smoothing the leather as if she could erase the last 5 minutes. The apartment was still perfect. The beige was still beige. But the air had gone cold, and for the first time, Charlotte realized that the man she had married was a ghost haunting his own life. Chapter 4. The surgeon's silence. Trey MacDougal lived his life in increments of millimeters. In the operating room, he was a god. He liked surgery because surgery was honest. A valve was a valve. A bleed was a bleed. When he held a heart in his hands, there was no subtext. There was only the pulse. But the moment he stepped into his Brioni suit and tied his silk tie, the performance resumed. He had spent 40 years being the correct version of himself. The son who joined the right clubs. The man who married the right woman. Charlotte York was the high-gloss finish on a life that was fundamentally hollow. Bunny had known. Bunny always knew. Years earlier, she had sat him down in the library of the family estate. She had handed him a glass of neat scotch and spoken in the tone she reserved for managing the help. Trey dear, she'd said, we all have our diversions. Jack is a lovely companion for the weekends. He understands the rules. But a MacDougal man provides a legacy. He provides the image. Charlotte York is the woman for the Christmas cards. She has the chin for it. And so, Trey had bought the ring. He had convinced himself that compliance was a form of love. He had stepped into the cage Bunny had built, and he had invited Charlotte in, never telling her that the door only locked from the outside. Chapter 5. The bulk order and the deposition. Samantha Jones held the diamond Somerset bracelet like it was a piece of contaminated evidence. It was beautiful. It was flawless. It was exactly the kind of thing a man bought when he wanted to feel generous without having to think. But Samantha's genius wasn't just in PR. It was in pattern recognition. Her phone buzzed. A notification from a socialite's blog. Richard's assistant, Dawn. There it was. Same bracelet, same box. Same smug caption about appreciation. I'm not a bulk order, Samantha whispered. She didn't cry. Samantha Jones didn't do tears. She did tactical strikes. When Richard answered his phone, she didn't bother with a greeting. Did you buy these in a 12-pack at a wholesaler? Richard, or was there a buy one, get one special for the women you're currently managing? It's a nice bracelet, Samantha. Don't be dramatic. So is toilet paper, and even that comes in different plastic. I'm a PR powerhouse, Richard. If I'm wearing the same gold mesh as the woman who organizes your dry cleaning, I'm not a partner. I'm a line item. And I, Dante, the duplicate. She hung up, feeling insulted on a molecular level. Across town, Miranda Hobbs was dismantling a deposition while fighting waves of nausea. She was 6 weeks pregnant, and her body was currently staging a coup against her ambition. She wiped her mouth discreetly with a linen handkerchief, turned back to the opposing counsel, and delivered a legal takedown so clean it bordered on art. I'm feeling great, she lied, her voice as cool as a basement, which is why I'm about to destroy your entire argument. Shall we proceed? Afterward, in the sanctuary of a bathroom stall, her phone buzzed. Steve, hey Mia, just checking in. I got those ginger snaps you like. My ma says crackers are the key to the first trimester. I can drop him by the office. Miranda listened, her jaw tight. Steve's kindness wasn't a comfort, it was a tether. If she accepted the crackers, she accepted the we. She accepted the Brooklyn house, the gold corduroy, and the slow erasure of the woman who didn't need a bag of saltines to survive a Tuesday. She deleted the voicemail. And then, for 3 seconds, she leaned her head against the cold tile and missed him so much it hurt. Chapter 6. The Pressure Cooker Brunch. The sun hit the table at cafeteria like an interrogation lamp. The city hummed around USA, frantic, caffeinated energy that usually felt like home, but today felt like a migraine. I stabbed at my salad, my mind still stuck on the gallery. I've seen his soul, I said. I've seen him at his most vulnerable. But at a gallery, in front of a woman in a $4,000 suit, I'm a friend. Is that the New York code for I'm not that into you? At least you're acknowledged, Samantha snapped, her martini glass sweating. I'm being treated like a tax-deductible expense. Richard thinks he can buy loyalty in bulk. Miranda pushed her eggs around her plate. Steve is suffocating me with sincerity. He's trying to wee my morning sickness. He's hovering. Carrie, it's like being babysat by a golden retriever with a heart of gold and a very limited vocabulary. We were so busy examining the cracks in our own mirrors that we didn't see Charlotte. She sat perfectly still. Her posture was a feat of engineering. She looked like a portrait of a Park Avenue wife, but her eyes were glassy, fixed on a point somewhere past the horizon. I found something, she said. It was barely a whisper. I didn't even look up. Does it explain why Vic treated me like a dental hygienist? Charlotte lifted her head. The mask was beginning to slip. Trey is in love with someone else. I reached for her hand, my voice softening. Oh, honey, is it a nurse? A socialite? Who is she? Charlotte looked me dead in the eye. It's a man. It's been a man for 15 years. And the worst part isn't the lie. She swallowed hard, her voice trembling. The worst part is that I was the camouflage. I wasn't the wife. I was the curtain. She stood up so abruptly her chair shrieked against the pavement. She smoothed her skirt, adjusted her pose, and walked away before grief could become a spectacle for the Sunday brunch crowd. Chapter 7. The cracking mask. That night the city felt different. The classic New York I loved felt like a stage set where the lights were beginning to flicker. Steve sat beside Miranda on her sofa that night. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't offer a wee. He just set a bag of ginger ale on the table and sat there. I'm not going anywhere, Miranda, he said, his voice quiet and stubborn. Get used to it. For the first time in her life, Miranda Hobbs didn't have a rebuttal. She just let him stay. Samantha met Richard in his hotel suite. She didn't scream. She didn't throw the jewelry. She simply slid the Tiffany box back across the table with the cold efficiency of a card dealer. If you want to play a game of duplicates, Richard, she said, her voice steady, play it with someone who doesn't know how to read the fine print. I'm a limited edition, and you're out of stock. She left with her head high, the elevators closing on a life she realized she no longer wanted to share. On Park Avenue, Bunny didn't even glance at the letters Charlotte presented. She simply continued pouring tea into a delicate porcelain cup. Charlotte, dear, Bunny said, her tone as light as a summer breeze. The MacDougal men have very complicated libraries. It's what makes them interesting. Don't be so gauche to read the fine print. Just enjoy the cover. It's a very expensive cover. Charlotte understood then that she hadn't just married a man. She had married into a tradition of silence. Chapter 8. Cover stories. Back at my apartment. The cursor on my laptop blinked like a heartbeat. A delivery arrived, a massive bouquet of white roses. The note read, "You're more than a friend. You're a classic." J. I stared at the word classic. The thing you called something when it was no longer new, no longer exciting, but still functional, still useful to have around. I sat at my desk and began to type. I couldn't help but wonder, in a city of 8 million people, why are we so afraid of being seen for who we really are? Maybe because once the secret is out, the fantasy is over. Maybe because we've spent so much on the cover story that we're terrified of what's written inside. Charlotte lay beside Trey that night. The apartment was perfect. The man was asleep. The letters were hidden back in the desk. She closed her eyes and smoothed the silk sheets, restoring the mask for another day. But as she stared at the ceiling, she realized the most terrifying thing about a facade. Eventually, the cracks are all you can see. And once you see them, you can never go back to believe in the lie. If you enjoyed this Sex and the City rewrite, like and follow for more like this, as well as other rewrites and even some originals. What storyline do you want to see reimagined next? Leave it in the comments below.